Hi, my name is Cormac Foster. I'm a senior DevOps evangelist here at GitLab, and today I'm going to talk about how you can use GitLab to perform Agile portfolio and project management. And before we get into specifics, I'd like to take a few minutes to explain how GitLab is structured and how that maps to your projects and products and teams. GitLab allows you to organize both work to be done and the people doing that work using the same constructs. So at the highest level, GitLab groups allow you to cluster together related projects and grant members access to all of those related projects. Below that, we have subgroups. Those are child groups that you can use to further refine your group. So a subgroup could be a team, it could be a functional group, a business unit, or so forth. Subgroups can be nested up to 20 levels deep, so there's no practical limit to the degree of specificity you can create. And finally, there's projects. GitLab projects are where the work actually happens. So all of the planning, coding, testing, delivery, the collaboration it takes to make that all happen and deliver that value, that all happens within a project. Now, my favorite aspect of this structure is that it's extremely flexible. We have customers who want to recreate their org structure within GitLab with a group representing a top-level division or product organization, and then just cascading down through the org chart using subgroups. Again, we have 20 levels of subgroups available, so if that is what you want to do, implementing it isn't a problem unless you have a really, really big org chart. But that may not be the best way for you to organize your work. Software is built very collaboratively and organizations are fluid. Your dev team composition could be very different on different projects and even potentially include the same people or people from different groups. So we want to be sure that we give you the freedom to build a system that supports whatever that looks like to you. Now, once that structure is in place, you need to define the actual work of a project. I will actually start at the bottom of the screen here with issues. Now, an issue is an actual discrete work item. This could be a user story, a bug report, a non-functional story. It could even just be a relevant discussion you want to capture alongside the rest of the work in a project. Issues can contain as little or as much definition as you need to accomplish the work. It could just say, I think we need to make this green, or it could be a discussion that continues for weeks, hopefully not, but for weeks or months with hundreds of contributors. Now, epics allow you to group issues and other epics to enable the management of a portfolio of initiatives or capabilities or features, and we'll show an example of that in a second. Epics exist across subgroups sharing a common parent group. They also exist across projects and milestones, which we'll get to in a moment. So they can be long-ranging, far-reaching projects that may not have an expiration date at all, or the expiration date may be very far in the future. When you want to view the progress of your epics and sub-epics, we have roadmaps, which show you your epic status in a timeline view or Gantt chart. The epics roadmap page shows a visualization of all of the epics under a group and or its subgroups. And from there, you can drill down into more detail about that epic and ultimately the sub-epics or issues within it. Milestones are designed to organize and track issues and code changes, which we call merge requests. Some of you may call them pull requests, to track all of those issues and code changes against a set period of time. So milestones equal time. They can be created for any duration of time, and they're used to track things like releases or sprints or any other time box that is important to you. Okay, now let's talk about actually doing the work. Within groups or subgroups, as we mentioned, are GitLab projects. A Git repository sits at the center of that project. Now that repository is the reason GitLab can provide a single platform for all types of users in an organization and support all sorts of end user tools. An application source code is the value that you're delivering ultimately to users and customers. So anything that contributes to that source code is essential context. That could be code reviews or test results or security scans or a discussion about the importance of a feature and shipping it and when these things need to happen. So all of that takes place inside of GitLab, so we can capture that context. And by storing that context alongside the code in the repository, GitLab creates complete transparency, which I think is unique in the industry, transparency and traceability from planning all the way to deployment. You can take a deployment and you can look back at everything, every step that led up to that in the chain, which is wonderful if you ever get audited, for instance. Now, speaking of audits, one of the big problems in enterprise Agile is governance. Agile works best when the practitioners have the ability to experiment and self-organize and iterate, and that means giving them freedom. But large enterprises need to be able to monitor progress and provide traceability and meet compliance standards and do all of those enterprise things. At GitLab, we give you the power to organize your work from the top down and set guardrails, as we talked about earlier. I mean, you certainly don't want people accessing things that they shouldn't. So you can structure your group and your subgroups to provide that sense of structure. But since we're a single application built around that Git repository, we can provide that complete traceability and roll up really detailed information from the practitioner level, things like the amount of time they're spending on things, for instance. And we can aggregate that into some really powerful information, which means you can give your teams the freedom to self-organize and work within those constraints you set, knowing that everything that happens will be logged and visible and auditable, and that to every level above them in that structure as you cascade up. And at any time, if you see something that you want to know more about, you can just drill straight down into that because you're working within the same application. So let's start with portfolio management and look at the components of the GitLab application you'd be working with most frequently. Now let's assume that your groups and subgroups are already defined, and we will jump into epics. So an epic can be a portfolio initiative, a campaign, a very, very large story that's going to require a substantial amount of work, any large collection of related items. When you create an epic in GitLab, you can get started right away with a title and description, and you can get as specific as you'd like as well. You can add explicit start and end dates. You can inherit those from a parent epic. You can apply labels, which we'll talk about in a bit. And you can collaborate with other users simply by mentioning them in the body text. But all you need to start is a title and a description. And we mentioned sub-epics before. You can break down the goals of your epic into discrete logical pieces for individual tracking and individual management, which is helpful if you have different, say, program managers managing different parts of your portfolio. You can use child epics for that and issues as well. Now, whether it's a child epic or an issue, the relationships between parent and child items is always visible and accessible for additional inspection anywhere in the system. So a child epic will show its ancestor. An issue will have a parent epic visible if it belongs to an epic. So that's really helpful because it, again, gives you context. If you are forwarded an email or someone says, hey, take a look at this, and it's an issue or even a sub-epic, a child epic, you can very easily see where that came from. You can click back up, you can get the context and understand where this fits in your portfolio. Now, roadmaps provide visualization of epics on a timeline calendar. And again, since we're a single application, you can click into any of those epics and drill down into specific issues as well. Milestones provide grouping and tracking of issues toward a delivery date. Again, milestones equal time boxes in the manner of projects or product releases. So for example, every month at GitLab, we release a new version of our software. We've done it over 100 times every single month, and each version is a milestone. That's what you're seeing here. Now let's look inside one of those milestones. Issues and the associated code addressing or resolving those issues are tracked together as part of a milestone. So simply by searching for a milestone name, you can get an overall view of everything that's going on there, not just the issues, the business solutions that people were setting out to address, but how those issues were also resolved as well. To measure the status of your work in a milestone, we have burn down charts. Burn down charts provide progress tracking against the backlog that is associated with a specific milestone. So ultimately, the goal is hitting 0. We want to be sure that we've done everything we set out to do in a milestone. We want to get that to 0. That's the goal, but the shape of that burn down is also important because it can tell us a lot about how we're breaking down work items. Perhaps we haven't broken them down with as much specificity as we should, so they're kind of too big to handle in a sprint, or they need a lot of definition, so work doesn't get started on them till later. Can also tell us how stressed out the team might be. Maybe they hit 0, but there's a mad rush at the end. These are all things that are important for you to know long-term for your planning. So the greater the deviation from that dotted line in either shape or distance, the more likely it is that something needs your attention. To the right of the screen, you'll see milestone level metrics like the status of issues, time tracking, total issue weight, which is the relative sizing assigned during the planning of each of those issues that are part of the milestone. Here's a board level view of the milestone, in this case, milestone 12.7 here at GitLab, that also provides you easy access to double click down and get deeper product details or perform more tactical management. You can click into an issue and assign it to someone else or make a comment to move things along or whatever you need to do. This view can show you work items or issues, but it can also show you merge requests, which again are code changes. It can show you participants in the milestone. It can also show you the labels that are applied to items in that milestone. And we'll talk more about labels in a bit. Here we have a group issue board that allows me to view the status of work items in a group across milestones. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk a bit about project management, how to plan and manage the actual day-to-day work within a given project. So within a project management context, you'll be working almost exclusively within the GitLab project, unless with groups and subgroups and planning epics and that sort of thing. You will be using issues and milestones quite a bit, though in a different context than the portfolio manager, and you'll be working a lot with labels. We'll also touch on a new interface, value stream analytics, which is very important at the project level. As I mentioned earlier, the issue is the primary work item within GitLab. In this case, the issue we're viewing is a user story, but again, it could be anything. To the right, you see assignments, related epics and milestones, and other fields of data like time tracking and weight, and those all roll up to the milestone and roadmap views that we saw earlier. You can also see labels, and labels are a really flexible, powerful way to categorize and report on work. You can create labels to represent issue types, so a bug or a feature suggestion, to business goals, workflow steps like stage 1, stage 2, or literally anything else. And if you can label it in GitLab, you can track its progress in GitLab, which is very, very powerful and can really adapt to just about any situation. In the main pane of the issue, we have a running history of all related work. So not just code changes, but discussions, approvals, reactions of people, all of the things that might normally get lost in a Slack message or an email. Those are all captured and aggregated here to provide context for any decisions that are made and provide an archive for any future retrospectives or audits or that sort of thing. It's also worth mentioning that we do integrate with email. So you can respond, if you are mentioned in an issue, you will get an email notifying you of that. You can then click from the email into GitLab and you can participate in the interaction there, or you can simply reply from your email, but it's still captured in that single source of truth because again, it's one application with one Git repository. I want to take a moment to say that while you can use issues for user stories and probably most of our customers do. GitLab also provides a specific discrete requirements management capability to set criteria against which you're going to validate your products. Requirements are long-lived. They don't disappear unless they're manually cleared, and they can be archived, and then they can be reactivated from the archives. This is particularly important for regulated industries that need traceability from requirements creation and modification all the way through to delivery. So please keep that in mind as well if you are one of those companies. Now back to issues. If I want to prioritize issues in a backlog, I can do that with a simple drag and drop. I can also sort issues by create date, by due date, label priority, and a number of other criteria. In sprint planning, I can use issue boards to prioritize my work within a sprint, and I can also move work between sprints as well, just by dragging and dropping. By applying labels to my workflows, I can also use issue boards as an information radiator, or as some of you know of them, big visible charts, BVCs, that provide a very clear indication of what my work item status is at any given time. Now, these labels are what we call scope labels. That means they're mutually exclusive. So no item can be both workflow : to do and workflow : doing. So by applying a doing label or dragging the item into the doing column, the system automatically removes the to do label. Now this is helpful because it allows me to modify work item status using boards, drag and drop, or using the issue UI where I go and manually select a label, make sure that I don't have two conflicting labels, or by using text-based automation. So my developers can use a script, I can use boards, and we're all happy with the result, and it all works out the same way. Project teams are very concerned with optimizing their internal processes, and we make it easy to find and address blockages in that process. So within a project, you can monitor the delivery of value through various stages using our value stream analytics dashboard. Out of the box, this comes preloaded with the most common stages of the life cycle, which you'll see there. So you can see how much time in your project is being spent on average planning your work, coding, testing, staging, and you can also see specific items that are contributing to those averages. Here, for example, we can see that we're spending most of our time in product planning, or rather we're spending the most time in product planning, which makes sense, and code review, which might actually be something we could speed up, maybe by tasking a few more people with it or looking at what's holding up the reviews. Since we're a single application with a single repository, you can click through directly into any work item on the right that might need attention, take care of that yourself. You can change the code yourself, you could perform a code review, you can tag someone, you can mention someone who needs to follow up on something. But if these stages don't work for you, you can hide any of them, and you can create custom stages based on workflow events that you choose. So you can track the duration from the creation of a ticket to the time at which it's assigned to someone, or the time at which code is first committed. You can do all of that very simply using a form field that comes up when you just click Add New Stage. And finally, we have a wiki to allow you to capture documentation and best practices and common resources or any information that needs to sit at the project level and not live within specific issues. I'll talk very briefly about Agile developers. If I'm a developer on an Agile team, what does my experience look like and what's important to me? I say briefly because to some extent it looks a lot like the project manager or the product owner, if it's a Scrum team, that experience that we just discussed. I'm using the same tools, but toward a slightly different goal. So I'm actually contributing a lot of the data that managers will see in reports, and I'm focused primarily on organizing my personal workload rather than managing, say, a portfolio of products or a project full of workloads being serviced by a number of people. So I'm working in that same project context again, not in the group, and I spend a lot of time reading and contributing to issues and using the task list they generate when I mention an issue or assigned one. So that's a really good way to organize just my to-dos. I'll also do time tracking within an issue, which then rolls up to those milestone reports. And I'll work with labels to categorize the issues I'm working with and move them through workflows. A lot of that work might happen as I'm dragging an issue from one column to another on a project board. But again, some of it could happen through scripts or in a number of other ways. And I'll use the project wiki for reference, and maybe I'll update it as well as I have best practices or other contributions. And then finally, I'll use value stream analytics to get a sense of my place in the value flow, to see what others are doing, and also see if there are areas where I can contribute. If I have some spare cycles, I can look at that and I can say, wow, there are some things that have been hanging out in the code review queue for a while. Maybe I can just jump in, pull one off the top, and help move that along. Since we were just talking about best practices, everyone's situation is different. I'll say that again, everyone's situation is different. There are as many different Agile implementations as there are companies practicing Agile. So I will definitely not try to tell you how to organize your Agile organization, but I will touch briefly on some of the best ways to use GitLab with whatever methodology you choose. First, design your group structure for top-down organization of people and access. And remember, those two things might be different, and you might need coordination across groups that aren't part of the same org structure. So take that into account and take advantage of our multiple levels of nested subgroups. Also, build your group structure for bottom-up reporting so that everyone who needs to monitor your progress can. Projects, on the other hand, should be focused on what we think of when we think of the word project with a lowercase p. The work items, code, collaboration, documentation, management tools used by a team. So used by a team to accomplish a specific set of goals, and again, by a specific team. So a project can be permanent, like an ongoing website, or it can be temporary, like a 3-month initiative that expires, but it should be a collection of related work items, generally toward a common goal and frequently with a common team. Epics should be large initiatives under which other initiatives and features live. So, for example, fix the caching on our commerce server should not be an epic, but that might live within an epic called improve site performance, and that could live inside a parent epic called improve customer experience. Roadmaps are top-down views into progress against time-based goals like milestones. Issues are any work item of importance that would sit within an epic, from user stories and feature requests to tasks, and again, those relevant discussions. As a best practice, when in doubt, if you need to communicate something, use an issue. If it's unimportant, you can close the issue. If it's extremely important and it turns out to be larger in scope than you imagine and it kicks off a big work stream of its own, you can promote it to an epic. You can promote any issue to an epic within GitLab, but use issues for everything because it's better to capture it than to not capture it. Labels are highly customizable, so you can use them for anything from team assignments to workflow modeling. The trick is applying them consistently. So take some consideration when you structure your labels, automate their application and by using templates, issue templates whenever you can so that labels are automatically applied in the correct manner and removes human error. And think about where you put them as well. So labels can exist at the group level and the project level. Group level labels will be available to all projects within a group. So that's where you want to put important labels that you want to share at the highest level, but only those. Everything else should go at the project level if it is only relevant to that project, because you don't want a huge list of group level labels that are only relevant to specific teams. But you still want teams to have that flexibility to create labels that help them manage their own work. So render unto the project what belongs to the project with labels. Again, issue boards are visual tools for status updates and issue management. Use them to get a quick visual overview of the status of work items in a given time increment like a milestone. And you can also use them to drag and drop items between milestones during release planning. And you can do the same to manage your own personal and team workflows. The issue list is where you go to actively search issues based on explicit search criteria and then take action on either individual issues or multiple issues. So for instance, if I want to search for a whole bunch of issues related to a specific milestone or assigned to a specific person, and I want to reassign them or I want to close them, that's where I would go to do that. It's also where you go to create issues within a project or import them from other sources. And with that, thank you for your time. If you'd like to learn more, please visit our website.